today I'm going to be speaking to you about probations and its foundations in biblical text. As you see on the screen, and Jesus said unto her, neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more. This is taken from the story of the adulteress who was taken to Jesus to have him judge her by the Pharisees. He did not agree with what the Pharisees were doing because he realized they were trying to trap him, and he later told her to go and sin no more. And this is the biblical foundation for probations. Probations in this country works on the premise that the judge gives somebody who commits a non-violent, non-serious offense the order to go and sin no more, go and commit no more crimes, or if you do, I will throw you in jail. So we have that established. The man who's personally responsible for creating the probations would be John Augustus. He was a layman. He had no training in criminal justice at that time, that existed even at that time. He was just a shoemaker. What he liked to do was, in his spare time, because this was before TV, before computers, before telephones, any of that sort of thing, back in 1841. So what he would do, he would go to the local courthouse and watch criminal trials. One day he was sitting in the court, and the bailiff brought in a prisoner in chains and sat him on the bench. He was sitting near the defendant's bench, and he and the defendant started getting into a conversation. He found out the defendant was there only because he was drunk in public. He hadn't assaulted anybody. He hadn't done any public indecency offenses. So when it came time for him to appear before the judge, John Augustus spoke and said, "Judge, may I speak?" And so the judge let him speak, and eventually he convinced the judge that if he put down a certain amount of money to have the judge release him into his custody until the time of his sentencing came. So the judge agrees, but stipulates that Mr. Augustus had to make sure that the man stayed sober and was employed. So after a month, he had to take the guy back to the same judge for his sentencing phase. When the judge saw that Mr. Augustus had made sure that this man had stayed sober and that he was gainfully employed and productive, instead of sentencing him to prison, which at that time would have been similar to this prison, which would be, this is actually a recreation of a cell that was in Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. Now this, with Mr. Augustus, was in Boston, and it would have been the same style prison cell. Now, this is what he saved him from. What Mr. Augustus did this out of, in his own words, was his own Christian charity. When he wrote in his diary about the cases, he kept a case log of everybody that he did this for, which he would, by the time he died, helped keep almost 2,000 people from going to this type of prison cell. And he had to make sure each of them were kept sober, gainfully employed, and weren't causing any trouble beyond that point. Excuse me. And once he got all that taken care of, the men were released, just as they would be today under the probation system. He did this with all of his own money. When he ran out of his own money, he started going around to the collective philanthropic organizations and the rich people of Boston, getting donations so that he can continue the program. Himself, he died a pauper. He bankrupted himself doing this because of the employees he had to, extra employees he had to hire to take care of his shoemaking business, and the extra employees he hired to take care of the probation business that he was running. But in so doing this, he also established what would today be the probation system. Without him, there wouldn't be one. There wasn't one before him, and there wouldn't have been one after him. The sad part is, it took until 20 years after his death. He died in 1858. The first actual legally established probation system in the United States will not be established in Massachusetts until 1878, and that was just for teenagers or other juveniles. The first adult probation system wouldn't be set until 1906, again in Massachusetts. Now, the things that he set up are these. The same ones we have today. Monitoring the probationer, which would be if somebody's placed on house arrest, it's up to the probation officer to make sure that they don't violate the terms of the house arrest. In other words, leaving when they're not supposed to. If they are allowed out of their house to go to work, whatever, making sure they're back before their curfew, etc. Next one, make sure they're employed. If the judge sets that as a standard, the probation officer has the probationer fill out a form telling him where he's employed. Every so often, the probation officer's job is to contact that employer and make sure that person is actually still employed there. If they're not, it's a violation and they have to be returned back to the court system. Third one, make sure they stay sober. If, for example, somebody's arrested for a drug or alcohol offense, the judge may require that they stay sober if they're released on probation. The probation officer does this by having them engage in either blood tests, urine tests, or other form of tests for alcohol or drug use. If they fail, it's a violation. And where else? Where are we at? Oh yes, if they receive a report from somebody that so and so saw so and so negotiate or engaged in some kind of activity with this known criminal over here, they have to investigate, check on it, and if it turns out to be true, that's a violation. And as you can see, what happened down here at the last point, this is what happens if they violate. They're turned over back to the courts or to the Department of Corrections to determine if they stay on probation, have the terms of their probation increased or toughened, such as if somebody who wasn't on house arrest might be placed on house arrest for this one here, the known criminal associations. Or if they're just going to send them right back, they're just going to send them to jail or prison for whatever term will be fitting for that term of crime that they committed. So that's the basic principle behind how we got the probation system today. The duties of the probation officer, and these would show that would be the values of what God would instill in humanity based on being merciful by not sending them to that type of prison cell, and still getting the principle of justice served by limiting what they can and cannot do to prevent them from going to that type of prison cell or a modern prison cell. I want to thank you for your time and your